About 3.5 years ago. Thank you, Doc. I think it was 3.5 years ago this gentleman made his first appearance on the show. It was one of our trips out to California before we moved here permanently. And at that time, he was the executive treasurer of the Burbank City Council, and he came to give us some greetings from Burbank, and we asked him on the first day of 1975 if he would come back again. He is now the executive secretary, or the executive treasurer. What did I say first?
Well, I lost you.
Well,
he's been promoted.
He's been promoted.
Yes.
Would
It's a high position.
Yes, it is. Would you welcome Mr. Philip Brooks?
I beg your pardon, I haven't gotten to my blue mark yet. Well, friends, it's been just... I don't know, really, no kidding. Did anybody see anybody else beside me see a snake? Really was one here. And a baboon, and a gorilla. You know, it's strange that it would happen. But just not just a very few weeks ago, a sister-in-law of mine, who happens to come from my wife comes from Buffalo. Oh, son of a gun. I thought I got the last one. I wish I'd known I had a choice. Well, the Buffalo Zoo had just received a shipment of the largest gorilla ever captured in captivity. That didn't even sound right over here. And my sister-in-law and her husband went to see the gorilla. They were standing there, and they were looking at it, and all of a sudden the gorilla spotted my sister-in-law, and he just couldn't take his eyes off her. And all of a sudden he went. And my brother-in-law nudged her, and he said, I think he kind of goes for you. And she said, don't be silly. And with that, the gorilla grabbed a couple of the bars and pulled them real far apart, reached out and grabbed my sister-in-law and pulled her in a cage and started pulling her clothes off of her and hugging her and kissing her. And she screamed to her husband, what am I supposed to do? He said, tell him you got a headache. You know, seeing those animals tonight, it sort of takes me back to my childhood when they used to have circuses, and they'd have and when I was a child, they used to have a parade before all of the circuses, you know, down Broadway in my hometown. And now that the two big, I don't think they do that anymore. Now that the two big circuses got together and just one circus now. They call it the greatest show on earth. I think it's now they call it the darn ding-a-ling and barn banging brother circus. But as I say, it takes me back to my childhood, and then now as I stand before you here tonight in my adulteryhood, just wonderful the memories I have back then when early or late spring morning or early summer morning when they'd have the parade, you know, all 7 of my brothers and I would get up and we'd run out to Broadway and sit on the curb. And we'd watch the parade. And Mom would always call after us, don't forget, children, when the elephants go by, you be sure and come home. And we'd say, yes, ma'am, and I don't know, some of you folks may never have seen a circus, but the elephants were always the very last thing in the circus, you know, in the parade. And the big, long, single-file string of elephants, and they, about 8 blocks away from our home, they had to cross a railroad track. And I recall this one particular day, just as this last elephant got on the track, the fastest train that ever came through Louisville came through at that same time, and you never saw such a mess in all your life. Cost that railway company $4,300,000. They only killed one elephant, but they pulled the tail off of 18 other ones. I remember my dad was telling us a story about one of those days when, to this day, I think he made it up, but he didn't tell it to me when I was just a little fellow. He waited till I was old enough to where he thought it was all right for me to hear a story of this nature. I think I was about 37. And he said that one of these elephants broke loose from a parade and got into a neighbor lady's backyard and got into her garden. And this is the part that I find hard to believe, but she said that she had never seen an elephant before in all of her life. So she reached down, she picked up the telephone, and she called the police and said there's a great big animal in my backyard, in my garden. He said, what kind of an animal is it? She said, I don't know. All I can tell you is it has 2 tails. He said, two tails? And she said, yes, and he's pulling out my cabbages with one of them. And he said, well, what in the world is he doing with them? She said, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. I remember many a time sitting there on the curb. I had a dream that I maybe someday would grow up and be a clown in a circus. Of course, my dream never came true. Well, it came half true. I grew up. And as a matter of fact, I did become a member of a circus. I was a performer. I was an aerial performer. In fact, I worked with my wife. We worked as a team, and we were known as Brooks and Brooks, world famous high trapeze artists. And I used to catch my wife in the act 2 or 3 times a night. I'm sorry, I can't think of any other way to phrase that. But in that particular art, there were those who swung and those who caught. And my wife was a swinger, and I was a catcher. Of course, she doesn't swing anymore, and I wouldn't know what to do if I caught her.
Foster, I remember the very first time you're out. We'll have to do this first, and we'll come back and talk about that.
All right.
Okay. You're all sobered up. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. We're back now. We're talking with Foster Brooks. Let me ask you, you do this so wonderfully, and the first time you were on our show was about 3.5 years ago, and people didn't really know for a while because you had not been seen nationally, and you came out, and they really thought you were bombed out of your gourd that time.
Oh, I'd spent the afternoon at Pepe's. Or Pepe's.
How did you learn to play such a convincing drunk? By observing and taking on the mannerisms of people?
I tell a lot of stories and tell them in dialect and all, but one night someone asked me if I would do a performance if I could get up about 15 minutes of comedy and perform at the City of Hope Dinner, Dance, and Ball at the International Hotel here in Hollywood, in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I'll try. And I had in mind doing something that I had done years and years ago on the Arthur Godfrey Talent Scout show, when that was a big thing in radio. And while they were introducing me, I just happened to think at that moment of my dad and how beautifully he told a story in that character.
Right.
My character is doing everything he can to keep people from knowing that he has had too much to drink.
Overreacting
He's not trying to act like a drunk. And my character is not trying to act drunk.
Right.
And he knows the people are laughing. He doesn't know necessarily why or particularly care. You ask him to come out and say something, and he's out there.
Right.
So and then while they were introducing me, I just thought of that, and I said, I believe I'll try this. And I did, and people laughed embarrassingly at me. You know, they were laughing like this and looking like they were, you know, and, oh, my Lord. I'd hear remarks like, that man will never get another job as long as he lives. Well, I've had hundreds of people tell me that they said the night I was on your show, the first time I had national exposure, that they were saying that poor man, he won't even go to the office tomorrow.
How could he be with the Burbank City Council?
Yeah.
That's great.
And then I turned around and handed you that last piece of plaque I had when it broke right here. You know.
You've had great success, and as you said before, of national stature, which came rather late in life for most people in the profession.
Yeah, I was 59 years old the night I was on your show, and it was 3 years ago. So things
That's
have really,
incredible.
really gone sky high for me. I played with nothing but the best. Perry Como.
That's right.
Three nights ago, Bob Goulet. 2 nights ago, Wayne Newton. And last night, Roy Clark. And tonight, back with you again. Now, where are you going to send me from here?
I don't know. Where would you like to head for?
Oh, I don't know. I'd like to go home for a while.
Has it changed your life to any great extent outside of, making a little better money? And the recognition is always nice when people see you and know who you are.
Well, I enjoy that. I enjoy the recognition, but it hasn't changed. I always remember that I was born on 22nd Street in Louisville, Kentucky, between Broadway and Maple, and I still love to go back and visit my old buddies, and it hasn't changed anything but my bank account, really, I suppose.
But that's not a bad change.
That was a nice change, yes. And when I was with you before, I didn't even have a watch.
You got a watch now and everything?
Yes, someone gave it to me.
Was your dad at all in the entertainment business, or was just a natural storyteller?
Dad was a beautiful storyteller.
Right.
And we had a man lived next door to us, a fellow named Roy Fisher, and he and Dad would get out in our kitchen almost every night and just try to outdo each other and telling all kinds of weird tales, you know.
And that's where you pick up the great ear for the dialects.
Yeah. I recall Dad we had a little Boston bulldog named Buster. Mm-hmm. And every night at 11 o'clock, for some reason or another, for the longest time, Dad would say, Buster, it's time to go to bed. And this Buster would run upstairs, that little Boston bulldog, pull out a pillow out of the closet and circle around in it, and he'd go to sleep. Then finally, Dad got an idea, and he pulled out his watch at 11 o'clock. He said, Buster, and he held the watch down like this, you know, and that's what any dog would come over and look, smell, whatever, you know. He said, it's 11 o'clock, get upstairs and go to bed. So he did that for a while until finally all he had to say was, Buster, and Buster would come look at the watch and go to bed. So now the man next door was over one night, and Roy Fisher was over home, and he said, Roy, do you know that's the smartest dog that ever lived? He said, what are you talking about? He said, he can tell time. He said, oh, come on, he can't tell time. He said, watch him. It's 5 minutes to 11 now. Watch him at 11 o'clock. He goes to bed every night at 11 o'clock. So 11 o'clock came, Dad reached in and said, Roy, see that? He said, yeah. He said, Buster? And Buster came running across the kitchen, looked at the watch, turned kind of shy like that, you know, turned around, went upstairs, and went to bed. And Roy Fisher said, by George, that's really something. I never saw anything like that. And Dad thought he'd go one better, you know. He said, that's not all that dog does, and I'll show you that later, some other time. He said, what's that? He said, he also talks. Uh-huh. Now, Roy Fisher said, oh, well, I know about that. Now, Dad didn't know where to go from there, you know. And he says, well, how'd you happen to know about that? He said, my dog came home this morning and told me.
We'll take a short break. We're coming right back.